Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a nice lunchtime. So let's start by refreshing our motivation of bodhicitta. We won't do a full meditation right now, but just sit quietly for a moment. And if you wish, you can visualize sentient beings in either of the ways we've talked about. Kind of, again, friends behind you to either side, difficult people in front, and then all the other countless beings in all directions surrounding them. Or that idea of the theater, again, this huge theater that we are playing at our show. We're on the stage. Those front rows of people that we're quite close to. And the vast darkness of the theater where all the strangers are. And then the difficult people that do manage to kind of keep things from flowing smoothly at times, that interrupt our show. Whichever way you're visualizing, just recall that every one of these beings is not fixed in that role, as we were meditating on before the break. Beings go from stranger to friend to enemy, back around again in this life. But of course, when we take into consideration countless lifetimes, we've been in these relationships with these beings, many, many different times, all three roles. There's no fixed ground upon which to have any bias towards them. So instead, we want to embrace all of them equally. Think that they're all within the focus of this mind of bodhicitta. Having the strong intention to be here to continue our investigation of equanimity with that motivation to help every one of them so they can attain the greatest happiness and complete freedom from suffering. And of course, the secondary thought that therefore we must become a Buddha for their sake. We must work on developing ourselves fully so we can then help them completely, perfectly. And then you can open your eyes and we'll begin our afternoon session. So again, in the first part, we were mostly looking at this idea of these three groups, the problems of having the distorted states of mind towards them, these attitudes. And as I said, the focus of today is how do we overcome those attitudes? Again, I introduced the disadvantages, of these three states of mind because this is, of course, can be a meditation in and of itself. I mentioned it at the beginning of the meditation we did just before lunch, so that you bring to mind that as a strong impetus to want to be free of these states of mind. They cause you a lot of pain and suffering as well as others. So recognize that, and of course you can that's the first technique you could always do, is just simply looking at the disadvantages of having attachment towards friends, anger towards difficult people, and then of course our indifference towards the countless other beings. But then in the second part of the meditation, after just briefly touching on those disadvantages, I went into this investigation of how things are changing, as I said in the motivation now too. I want to share a couple of verses from Essential Nectar. This is a wonderful Lam Rim text by Yeshe Ngundru, I think is his name. Anyway, this has some verses that pertain to developing equanimity. And so I wanted to just share those verses because I think they kind of give a detailed explanation of this process of developing this even-mindedness on the basis of seeing the transitory nature of all these relationships. That there's nothing fixed, there's no eternal friend, there's no eternal enemy, there's no eternal stranger. So he says, and this is like verses 307 through something like 313. Although now all these migrating beings appear as friends, foes, or neutral, in being attached to this, I develop attachment for the friends, hatred for foes, and for neutral folk, unconcern. Still, those who seem to be enemies at present have in the past been my mothers many times. They've helped me in such ways as feeding me with their milk and lovingly nursing and guarded me from all harm. All those who seem to be friends at present, too, have in the past been the clearest of enemies. Numerous times they have killed or beaten me, and even devoured me alive. This also is taught. Also, those who seem to be neutral at present in many former lives have variously been friends and foes. They've done me harm in anger and also infinite times done me good with love. Therefore, among all these migrating beings, which should I hate and which should I be attached to? Let me now not discriminate liked and hated, but have equal mind towards all of them as my friends. If I should think, since friend and foe aren't certain, it is not right either to inflict harm or to give aid, but it is right to abide unconcerned, then this is not correct. Since the terrible harm by past lives' foes was deluded, not knowing I was their parents, anger is wrong. Since the help they provided in past lives when they were friends resided in truth, why should I not repay this help? Kind of the idea in the end there being focused on, the attitude we're not really driving towards is to be unconcerned or indifferent. That's the incorrect attitude we have towards the neutral people. And that is a mistaken mind for equanimity, where we kind of feel a detachment to all beings, kind of like, oh, well, it doesn't matter then. They can be a friend, an enemy, a stranger, and their situation doesn't matter at all. Well, no, we should feel eventually, as I mentioned earlier, that we start to see all beings in the light of them being very close and dear to us, where we see that this sense of having an equal regard means that we are going to be equally concerned for each, equally involved in the welfare of each. Otherwise, again, we're sort of missing the point of the meditation. The meditation isn't just to have this, flat line with regard to everyone that we see. It's to recognize that beings are in this kind of revolving door of kind of coming in as a stranger, leaving as an enemy, coming back as a friend. Da, 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 da. They're just kind of going in and out of our lives in this way. And all the actions that they do, we shouldn't be so sensitive to and responding to in a very fixed way. But rather, we should see their overall condition, that this is what beings are doing. This is, they're, as was said in that one verse, they're kind of ignorant of the role that we've played for them, that they've played for us. And the meditation on equanimity, as I've said previously, is really the foundation for generating some of the other meditations to develop bodhicitta. But those meditations can also reinforce our strong desire to hold all beings equal. What was talked about there in terms of seeing the kindness of other beings, the way that beings have contributed to our welfare. This is the lens that we want to ideally see them all through. And that'll again come in later in terms of the techniques for developing bodhicitta. But at this level of wanting this even mindedness, the first thing is to recall, and well, after seeing the disadvantages of the distorted states of mind, to recall that there's no fixed friend, enemy, stranger. All beings have played those roles countless times. There's that story about Shariputra who had some sort of clairvoyance where he was seeing a family having a dinner in a kitchen, and he was, laughing at the kind of the what's the word for it, the inane and ridiculousness of samsara, by seeing that the roles that they had played in previous lives that were now manifesting in these completely different roles, they were totally blind to that. Even though one was an enemy to the other in the previous life, now they're partners, and then the other one was doing this and that. I mean, this is the reality of samsara. We're all floating in and out of these roles. There's nothing fixed. I mean, in terms of having a kind of kind regard towards others, they often use the example of if someone gave you a gift 50 years ago and someone gives you a gift now, is there any difference between those two? Those two people gave you a gift at a different time. Well, if all beings have given you some sort of gift, if they were your mother, your dear one, and did something well for you, they should be held in the same light as the beings who are doing that for us now. And that's kind of the perspective that this goes into once we settle on even mindedness and equanimity, is to make sure that we hold all beings very dear. So it's not to get us to a sort of complacent attitude. It's actually for us to then focus on when they have been extremely kind to us, and not to get attachment for that, but rather to be wanting to reciprocate that kindness. So again, we see how some of these meditations do help to complement what happens in the full techniques of developing bodhicitta. Again, I'm not going to talk about those in great detail today, but I think most of you have studied the Lam Rim and know that this mind of equanimity leads into the full investigation of seeing all beings as having been your mother and seeing their kindness, wishing to repay their kindness, all of this, as well as it can be a strong foundation for the other technique of developing bodhicitta. If you need to know more about bodhicitta, again, there are ample resources out there in the Lam Rim books that you have or that you've studied. So let's talk about, well, let me open it up for questions and comments, because I didn't really do that with the meditation. We didn't have time for that. Are there any comments or questions on this investigation into kind of seeing this temporary, impermanent nature of these relationships as a foundation for equanimity? Does it make sense? Is everybody kind of getting the gist of this? And again, ideally, we want to settle on, as I think it was even that one verse that was said by Yeshe Sundru or Nundu, I can't remember his last name. It says, um, since the help they provided in past lives when they were friends resided in truth, why should I not repay this help? Again, this is where we want to primarily focus, as we will see. Again, if you've studied the techniques for developing bodhicitta, that's the focus, is to see all beings as having been incredibly kind. Because even those ones who are incredibly kind to us now have not been kind to us in every lifetime. It was said they probably even devoured our bodies or did things to us that, were totally against that principle of kindness. But we can focus on that. So again, this is the gist of this argument or this reasoning, is that these relationships change over time, both within a single lifetime as well as many lifetimes. Yeah, Nancy,
Hi,
please.
John. The thing I thought about during the meditation was not only the people in the audience
Mm.
that had hurt me or that I was friends with. I tried to think when I might have been the person in the audience and
Mm.
who have I, hurt or been friends with, and
Mhm.
how that's changed as well.
Sure, sure. Yeah, that's something we're going to talk about to some degree in this next topic, is the fact that we have these differing perspectives because every one of us is on our own stage, right? We're in the audience of everyone else's. Many people were in the dark of their theater. Many people were in their front row, or some people at least. And for some people, no doubt, we've been the person interrupting their show. We've been the obnoxious person that has ruined their day or ruined maybe even their whole lifetime. Who knows? So it is important to hold those perspectives too, to think about what is it like to be on the receiving end of those attitudes when we've been that person. Yeah. I'm going to go into this in more detail. Maybe if there aren't any other comments, then I'll just go ahead and continue with that. But let me check in and see. But that's a very good point. To kind of use that as a way of seeing what's the perspective when I'm that person. You know, anyone online or? Okay, so let's talk about that. This whole idea of differing perspectives. Because once more, we're on our stage with our front rows, with our dark of the theater, with our people interrupting the show, but everyone has their own stage and they have their own people that play that role. And some of it can overlap, right? We might be friends with certain people that also share friends with us. So maybe we're in a couple of people's front rows. But the idea is that everyone is going to be in different places in the theater, no doubt, overall, when we start taking into consideration the variety of beings that are out there. As I said, for most of them, we're in the dark of their theater, right? Whatever we're doing, they're totally oblivious to, and they're not having any regard for. And maybe some ways we might feel it doesn't matter that I'm not in everybody's show. Maybe that would be exhausting to be sitting in everyone else's, audience trying to take in all of what they're about. But the reality is that if we start holding that idea of the differing perspectives, this can also be a way of undermining some of our bias towards people. Why? Because even the most difficult people, the people who are interrupting our show in pretty catastrophic ways. People who've inflicted great harm upon you, they might be seen very, very differently by someone else. In someone else's theater, they may be in the front row. You know, certainly in their own show, they've got all these, people who are lining up in their front rows and what have you. They've got a whole different relationship with beings than we do. When I start talking about these sorts of things, I'm always reminded of Venerable Rabina's comment about Adolf Hitler. And you might look at somebody like that who's had a pretty negative bias in our world, right? We don't, understandably, based on the actions that Adolf Hitler was engaged in and all of the horrible things that happened on the basis of what he did, that we can kind of, yeah, say these were not good things that happened on the basis of his thoughts and actions. But even as Venerable Rabina says, even Adolf loved his little doggy woggy, he had his little German shepherds or whatever dog he had that he loved and cared for. And he had people in his life that were in his front row again, that saw him in their front row, that had this vision of Adolf as being somebody very dear to them. It's hard for us to think that way. And we're not in any way trying to approve or condone of any of the actions he did by saying those things. We're just understanding that there are different perspectives. It all depends on whose theater you're sitting in and where you are in that theater and who's on stage that you're kind of looking at and having a relationship with. These things are going to change wildly when we start looking at other people. One thing too that I think plays a role in this is that we tend to, when we are defining people in these roles, as I was just talking about with the previous meditation, define them in a very narrow range of time. Well, is that really fair? I mean, certainly Adolf Hitler was a good chunk of his life, perhaps, where he was moving in that direction. And then, of course, enacting all of his policies and things in Germany, Nazi Germany, and all of what transpired with World War II. I mean, there's quite a block of time of that life. But that still is only one lifetime. Adolf Hitler, the being who had that consciousness, had countless other lifetimes where it was probably a very compassionate and caring and concerned person in many lifetimes. Instead, we focus on one aspect of a person and we think it defines the entire person. Now, the test of this is think about, I know it's painful. I'm going to give you that precaution. This is a painful exercise, but think about when you were at your worst in this life. We've all had those moments, right? That we like it just feels horrible to think about them, right? When maybe due to various causes and conditions, we were really mean to somebody. We might have done something or said something. When I used to go down to the prison in Santa Rosa, I mean, some of those guys, when they think about their worst time in their life, it's pretty horrific, right? Some things that people have done that they've ended up in prison for. Most of us have not done those things, or if we did them, we didn't end up in prison, perhaps, but we've done things. We've been involved as being the perpetrator of some sort of violence on others, be it verbal or physical, or even just our thoughts towards others. Would you want to be defined by that in your entirety? Right? If someone thought that's who you are, that's who Don is that ugly moment when he was blah, 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 doing those things. We wouldn't want to be defined that way. We know we're so much more than that. We know that that's just one moment in our life, one little kind of slice of this life when I was behaving in a way that is not who I really feel I am, not who I know I am in many other ways. So we're getting into this territory of understanding that there's this also very different perspectives, and we shouldn't be adhering to things being seen the same by all other beings, even much less ourselves. In terms of if we spent enough time with that person who was a difficult person, we might come to see that there actually are many other facets to that person that we're not appreciating or that we're not even seeing. I remember when I was working at Levi Strauss in San Francisco, there was a woman. I had applied for a promotion in this one department, and I had actually even heard from her boss that I had gotten the job earlier that day. And then I found out that this woman changed her mind and actually hired somebody else. And I wasn't even given an explanation about why all this transpired. Suddenly I was just like going from this elation to this being really upset that I didn't get this job. Well, she became like #1 on my enemy list, because she did this, and of course this was well before I met the Dharma. I wasn't always, kind and gentle. Not that I'm always kind and gentle now either, but the idea is that we can have these experiences where suddenly somebody, based on one action, gets put on the shit list. Suddenly there's somebody who we think really horribly of. Well, this was my mode of thinking about her for many years. And I had the opportunity. She had moved on to another department in the same corporation, and we had to work on a project together. And I actually got to work with her and hear a bit more about her life and the things that happened in her life. And I came to like totally turn it around. Saw her with more compassion, more concern, and really began to see the wide array of things that define her. That she's not defined on one action she did towards me, that she probably had her own valid reasons for doing it, that were based on her criteria for who she wanted to hire and blah, 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 blah. May have had nothing really to do with me. Maybe it was, again, the advantages she saw in the other candidate. I mean, who knows? But I made it into suddenly she's that. I'm defining her as that. But I'm not seeing the other perspectives of her. I'm not seeing that she has many other sides to her. So both of these ideas that other people are seeing things frequently from their vantage point that could be very well contrary to how we're seeing others. But even, are we seeing that person correctly? Are we seeing them completely? What is our perspective? Our perspective is frequently defined in a very, very narrow range based on, like I said in my example, one experience. Before that, I thought she was fine. I'd worked with her. I had some issues with her, but then she does this one thing, denies me a job that I thought I was supposed to get. I felt entitled to get whatever was going on in my mind. And then suddenly I'm moving her out of the theater or the front row, and she's this problem person. She's this person that I have this totally different relationship with. So I think we all do this to some degree. Again, do we want to be defined on the basis of our worst moment? Well, no. Well, then why are we defining others who are in that category of kind of enemy on the basis of that one moment? Or it can be even a series of moments, but even if you say it's a whole life, even if you have somebody who's had a pretty negative life, again, we use Adolf Hitler as kind of a standard example, or Pol Pot, or one of these, people who've done a whole lot of harm to others in this world. That's still only one life. They're not always that person. They're not always this, person up to mayhem and mischief in this world. They're going to be somebody different, depending upon other causes and conditions, depending upon how things ripen for them. Right? I mean, does this make sense? So why are we again fixated and identifying people in these categories on the basis of such a narrow range of our experience, our perspective, and not taking into consideration the ways that other people are looking at that being? Well, and maybe a part of it is we put those people in the same category as them. Well, if you like, so and so, well, then you're the same as them, and you're on my my list as well, and forget you. But is that even fair? You I can't help but, because of the times in this country, and what's going on and the divisiveness and what have you. But think about the fact that so many of us are really blind to so many of the qualities of people who are on the other side, whatever you think of as the other side. For many of us, it's the Republican side, perhaps. But when we look at people on the other side and the things they support and the things that they do and say, we're once more tending to define it in a very narrow range and not looking at all the other aspects of who these people are and what is leading them to the decisions that they make. Some of you may have read the book called Strangers in Their Own Land, by Arlie Hochschild, I think is her name. She's a Berkeley professor who spent 5 years in the Lake Charles County area of Louisiana. If you don't know that area, I didn't really know that much about it. Apparently, a lot of the petroleum companies and things came in and left behind just an incredible mess. It's an environmental mess that is there, cancer causing agents all over the place. People, really dealing with a horrible situation. And yet, one of the largest groups of Trump supporters in the country. And you kind of look at it as like she puzzled over, why are people kind of voting in their worst self-interest? Why are they supporting people who are not going to do anything about rectifying the situation that they are suffering from? But again, not still taking into consideration all the other things that feed into that, all the other factors, not just wanting to pigeonhole people and say these are people who are ignorant or these are people who are whatever, but to see that everyone has their own story and their own things that contributed to why they do what they do. Never, again, not getting into what's right or wrong. That's not the issue. The issue is to have a place in our hearts where those people can still fit in because we see that they are suffering and making decisions and doing things on the basis of what has kind of conditioned them. We all were conditioned certain ways, or I shouldn't say we all because I'm not, shouldn't make the assumption everyone's like me in that regard. But many people are conditioned to think of things in a particular way, and that's what has happened in the conditioning that we've had. Other people are conditioned to think in a totally different way. Doesn't mean that they're not worthy of our compassion or concern. This is what I'm getting at with this topic is really there's differing perspectives and differing things that we are often blind to about people, that we are determining where they are in our theater on the basis, once more, of a very narrow range of data. And then thinking we're totally correct. Well, of course they're like that because this is what they did. But once more, if the finger was pointed at you and they would say, of course, Don's like that because he did that. I'd be like, yeah, but that's one little moment of my life when I was like that, when I was doing my most embarrassing moment of my life, where I was being cruel to somebody, harmful. I don't want to be defined by that. I don't think others do either. So again, I think that that's well worth a bit of meditation and reflection. Let me open it up and see what comments people have on that, or if you have examples from your life that you're willing to share. I think it's always good to have others kind of chime in and say, yes, I mean, I had somebody who I came to see some other sides of them and found that they were very different from my perception of them. Anyone want to share any of that online or here in the Gompa? Anyone?
Barbara
Oh, we got a
has
hand up
her hand.
there. Okay, Barbara. Yeah.
Hi, Gen Don. An
Hi,
exercise
Barbara.
that I learned actually from Byron Katie years ago was I was at a course that she taught, and we were given random pieces of paper. And we were to take the piece of paper and see what it said on it, and it would say like liar or kind, and we needed to come up with three occasions in our life where we either were a liar, where we were kind, where we were mean, the whole gamut. And that was a real equalizer for me
Mm-hmm.
because I realized there wasn't one word on a piece of paper that I couldn't come up with three instances of when I was that. And that was just very, very helpful for me. So I just wanted to share that.
Wonderful. I haven't heard of that exercise. I know Byron Katie's work a little bit, but mostly this investigation into what is true and what isn't true and why we hold those things. But that's an interesting exercise. And I agree. I mean, every one of us can probably find ample, even more than three, perhaps, times when we've been these various labels. As you're pointing out, we might choose a particular label and then we adhere to that. And we don't think about the other person having many other dimensions to them, just as we have many dimensions to ourselves. Many other times when we've not been kind, when we've, done things that are in opposition to that. I would bet most people have a pretty, I mean, I know we have a culture that's pretty down on ourselves frequently, a lot of self-deprecation and what have you. But I would think most of us think we're good people, right? And I think that everyone in our country thinks they're good people. They have good concerns. They're caring people, what have you. We have some cases of people perhaps are not as uh, caring or concerned as others, but I think this is the general feeling. But we have to see there are many dimensions to us, many other aspects to us that we could be blind to. That's a wonderful exercise to kind of open up our eyes. So thanks for sharing that. Phyllis has something she wants to share here in the Gompa, but if there are more comments online, please put your little indicator up, your hand up, and we'll make sure we call on you.
So in the last year, I suddenly began, I've already been checking when I would get mad at someone. They hurt my feelings. And then I would want to just cut them off and not talk to them again, But in that process, I began to uncover I probably still don't have them all, many, many times in my lifetime that I've done, cut people off, just one mistake, that's it, I'm not friends with you anymore, or not friends, so wouldn't necessarily be friends, but split off, that's it, I'm not connecting.
Right.
And I've been able to consciously not do that now, in the here and now, but I'm really shocked and surprised at how much that I lived that life. That wasn't something new, and I just started. So I just want to share.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Phyllis. Yeah. I think we all have done that, certainly. We can put that label on a piece of paper, and I'm sure we've all been the person who unfriended others or just detached from others on the basis of certain actions. We've all engaged in that behavior. And I'm not denying that because once more, this is one of the things to keep returning to. We're not denying that people fit into these three categories. There are people who will harm you. You have that karma with them for them to harm you. And I'm not saying that you should willingly accept harm all the time and just be a kind of punching bag for them or what have you. This isn't what we're saying in this teaching. We're saying, what is your attitude or your thought towards someone who fits in that category? If you don't want to be harmed by them, you don't have the strength of mind to endure that and to make something positive out of it. Many bodhisattvas can do that. They can be with the difficult person and actually make it fruitful. But if that's not where you're at, detach from that person, protect yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. But what are the thoughts you're having towards them then on the basis of that? Are you, again, pigeonholing them into that category and thinking horrible thoughts about them and all this anger and resentment towards them for what they did and making them into something that, again, is not the full view of that person? That's not it, the totality of that person. So I think it's worth examining this, and this does touch on some of this Byron Katie work of how do we know that our perception of someone is true? We only have that one little moment in time where what they are saying and doing hurt us or did something that we were disturbed about. And therefore, we kind of encapsulate them, completely cover them in that label of somebody despicable, somebody horrible, somebody we don't want in our lives. Is that really fair? If we were on the receiving end of that, we would say, absolutely, it's not fair. That's not who I am. But this is what we do with others very frequently. Tough stuff. What I like about this work on equanimity is it causes us to look at our own delusions too. As I mentioned earlier, we frequently don't spend enough time, especially looking at our attachment, but even our anger and aversion, we're somewhat blind to, and the way that it plays a subtle role in how we relate to various people. Again, just if you see somebody come into town and they've got a particular bumper sticker on their car, watch the thoughts that come up immediately, Whether from a certain state with a certain bumper sticker, and then you immediately are thinking horrible things about them, right? Well, why? You're defining that person in such a narrow range of who they are. I'm sure they don't think that they're such a horrible person. They've got lots of friends. They've got people who love them and care about them. So this is what our biases are doing. Any other comments on this topic about differing perspectives and how much we are shaped by stuff that isn't really in line with the whole picture? Anyone? Yeah, Rita wants to share something. Great.
Yeah, in line with this inquiry, I'm thinking of the red-blue dichotomy that we can bring up all the time, and
Right.
how in my own family, extended family, cousins, whatever, over the years, there's been many times when I'm aware that not everybody's on the same side of the red or the blue. And I'm specifically thinking of when I have it's very subtle, because I can sometimes get in there and say, okay, I can see the wonderful aspects of, say, my cousin who's on the red side, and just see what wonderful, how they treat their children, and how they are very generous in their communities. I can see all these wonderful things. And that's great that I can do that. What I have to go a little deeper with is to kind of go, yeah, Rita, but you're still thinking that you're right to be on the blue side. And to then go a little bit deeper and just wonder, so what is it about being on the red side that is just, for these people, it's almost necessary. It's something they need. It's something that supports them. So it's just another place where I'm going. It's like, okay, keep peeling the onion here. Keep peeling the onion. See what's underneath all of this.
Wonderful. I think this is the deeper work that we all have to do. Again, to be willing to look at our own stuff. Quote Venerable Rabina again, though she said she was quoting somebody else, but this is so Venerable Rabina, and I think most of you have already heard this quote. But she said, being Buddhist doesn't mean that we're kind of sitting there all peaceful, just everything, oh, blue sky, wonderful, nice. She says, being a good Buddhist means having your hands in your own shit. It's the third time I've used that word today. I apologize for people who might be offended by it, but I can't imagine most of us are. But this is what it's like. What Rita's attesting to is that we have to look kind of deeper. We have to go deeper, and you have to go, yeah, but why that? But why that? Why am I feeling that way? What is the rationale for that? And I'm hoping that we won't be able to do this, obviously, in just a single workshop today, but this kind of gets you in that direction if you aren't already doing that investigation. Because that's what it's all about. And if we can't be attentive to that and paying due to what's going on in our own minds and the thought processes that are feeding into our nonsense, our garbage, well, then what are we doing here? And I'm saying this to myself as much as any of you, seriously. We always have to go back to that. This is the work. The work is the internal examination and peeling the onion and figuring out what are the thoughts behind that and why do we feel that way and what's going on and is it really valid? Is it justified? Because if we do that, we will find inevitably that, again, all of these delusions that we have are not true. That's what makes them delusions. That's what the problem is that we are defining things in a way that is contrary to how they actually exist. Now, again, we're not going to the deeper level today of like the emptiness teachings, which get at the uprooting of all of that at a much, much deeper level. But that can even be applied to these teachings on equanimity. You can begin to see the empty nature of things as a rationale for not holding to beings in a particular way, because that also is playing into it, obviously. Because whenever the delusions are present, that ignorance is present, that is concretizing what we're seeing and thinking that that identity and that person and everything is inherently there. When actually it's, again, a dependent arising, just arising on the basis of various causes and conditions that make it appear in a particular way. It's illusory. It doesn't have any sort of concrete qualities. But even just investigating the false thinking that's feeding into our delusions in a more conventional way is earth-shaking. It can really get you out of the way that we're living our lives on autopilot, just following these delusions all the time. Have we gotten anything from doing that over countless lifetimes? No. I mean, it's not contributed to our welfare in one degree. I mean, it's only done harm. So we have to start waking up and really changing our minds. And I have complete confidence that the degree to which we change our minds in this life does feed into our future lives. I mean, I think the work we do is bound to have an impact in our future life. Otherwise, again, there wouldn't be any point. We just keep like Sisyphus, rolling up the hill and then it comes back down, and then rolling it up the hill and it comes back down. I mean, you get to the top of the hill. It's not a Sisyphean. I don't know what the right word would be. Sisyphean. I don't know what the adjective would be. we actually can make this progress. And that's what this life is for, to look at these things like we're looking at today and to say, why am I following these distorted states of mind? And why is it causing me to act in the particular ways that I do and have the thoughts that I do towards the people that I share this world with or that I am in cyclic existence with, all the various beings? Any other comments, questions? This has been great. This is what we're here for today. At least what I feel we're here for today. I hope you agree. Okay. Let's do a short little meditation on this technique of kind of changing our perspectives by, or maybe the better word is releasing some of our kind of autopilot states of mind by seeing the different perspectives. So again, what we'll do is we'll work with these same three beings, although if you want to change beings, you're welcome to if you found that one of them wasn't so effective to work with. But let's sit in silence for just a couple of minutes in order to focus our mind. If you need to stretch a little bit before you do this, I know we just had lunch, so you're more than welcome to get up and stretch a bit, and then return to a meditation posture, sitting on your cushion or chair. Let's do again a few minutes on the breath, and then I'll come in and lead you in this reflection. As before, you can visualize all beings surrounding you and the way we first talked about, as well as the theater example. But as I indicated, we're going to work with one individual from each of these three groups. Again, it might be useful to use that same person or being that you brought forward in the previous meditation. But if you want to, change it up and choose other beings, you're certainly welcome to do that. Again, visualize one friend, one person who is a stranger, and then one person who meets that criteria of being someone difficult for you, challenging for you, again, that you're comfortable working with. And just imagine those three kind of being drawn out from these three groups and appearing just before you. And as you look at each of them in your own mind's eye, observing each of those three beings, do take note of the tendency for that particular affliction delusion to arise, the attachment towards our friends, the indifference towards strangers, the aversion, wishing to push away those who are difficult for us. Even if we've done some work, we can often still feel a bit of that impulse, of that delusion arising. And recall, as before, the disadvantages if we continue to have those deluded states of mind towards these three individuals or the groups that they represent. How much we will suffer as well as they will suffer from us continuing to have attachment towards those who are close and aversion towards the difficult people, the indifference, the neutrality towards those who are strangers. And make this the impulse for you to engage in this meditation, to try to overcome these biases so we can hold the mind of even regard, equal regard for every one of them. So now focus your attention on the person you've selected from the group of friends, people who are close to you. We might first of all examine, we're focusing in our attachment on all of what is pleasant about that person. But that person isn't always pleasant and certainly has other sides to them, perhaps that we haven't even seen. Maybe there are people in their life that they treat quite poorly. There are certainly many who are oblivious to that person, who consider that person to be a stranger. So once more, if we examine our own mind of attachment towards them, that impulse that we have, we can see it's based on only our experience and perhaps our being blind to other aspects of that person. So again, is there a solid foundation for our attachment that is there all the time in all of their relationships with all other beings? Or rather, is this a distorted state of mind that is causing us to have attachment and therefore have a bias towards that being? Because we are being blind to various aspects of that friend is perceived as something different by many other people. And to some people, our dear friend may be an enemy, may be someone who they find quite challenging and difficult. And to many people, our dear friend who seems so wonderful and delightful is actually a stranger, somebody they don't know at all, and are oblivious to the welfare of our dear friend. So who's correct? Are we correct in holding that person as a friend and having attachment towards them? Is the person who sees them as a difficult person correct in generating the aversion, anger, maybe even hatred towards them? Are the people who don't even know that dear friend of ours correct in seeing that person as a stranger and having an indifference towards them? And try to take into account the differing perspectives of this one person that we consider to be a friend as a way to undermine our attachment towards that friend. Not to lose our regard for them at all, but rather to see that attachment distorts that. Attachment is only looking at this narrow range of our own perspective, not taking into consideration the perspective of others who may have a very different relationship with that person. Just going to just reflect on this for a short while. Analyze to see if this is true. And move your attention to the stranger. And this is a being that perhaps you've seen around in your life, but you don't have any real connection with them, don't know anything about them, don't have any real regard for them. Again, you have this mind of indifference. It is a problem. But first, think about how this is only your experience with this being in terms of this lack of a real valid and a direct contact with them. They have many other aspects of their life that you are blind to, that you are not seeing. Many other qualities as well as faults that we are totally oblivious to. So first, just reflect on your own perspective being quite narrow in regard to defining that being as a stranger and then having a mind of indifference towards them. Is this mind valid? Does it have a valid support? And because there are many facets to this stranger that we are blind to, other beings have very different definitions and descriptions of who that person is. Now, for some people, that person is a very dear friend, has amazing qualities, is a beautiful person that they want in their lives and that they're perhaps quite attached to. For other people, that stranger to us is a difficult person, an enemy. And that person may have a great hatred or anger towards that person who's a stranger to us. So, our indifference, one person's attachment, another person's hatred, which of them are correct, or are they all in error? Because the person they're observing, again, has many different facets and features. Each of these is a distorted mind in observing that person and defining them only in one way, based on only one criterion. So again, reflect in this way about how others observing that person have different perspectives and see if it helps to undermine your own indifference towards the stranger. And move on to the difficult person that you were visualizing. Again, and notice what arises for you, the aversion energy towards them, wishing to push them out of our lives. But remember, you're defining that relationship on the basis of a certain criteria that is not the whole person. They have many other sides to them, qualities, faults, any other things that we are not open to at that point when we're defining them in that way and having a mind of aversion or anger towards them. This perspective is somewhat limited by virtue of that. We aren't encompassing the whole being. Certainly not even in this life, much less taking into consideration the countless other lifetimes they've had. So again, first reflect on that. We're not seeing the whole being. Therefore, is our mind of anger or aversion valid? And as before, because there are many different facets or features of this being that we are blind to, others see them in a completely different way. To some, our challenging person, difficult person, enemy is the dearest friend. Again, they might have great attachment to that person because of the qualities that they see that we are blind to. Other people may regard that person as a complete stranger, have an indifference towards them. Again, are any of these three completely valid then if we have differing perspectives from different individuals? If this is my enemy, challenging person, and it's their friend, dear person, who's correct? Or are we both in error to some degree in having such a narrow range of experience that we are basing our deluded states of mind on? Our anger, our attachment, our indifference. Again, investigate this. And now bringing all three of these beings to mind, as we did before, examine them and see if these three kind of deluded attitudes have lessened to any degree. Do we feel a more even-mindedness towards the three individuals in front of us that we are simply labeling as friend, stranger, difficult person? We see that our attitudes of attachment, indifference, and anger towards them, there's no real solid ground because other beings see them in different ways because they have other facets of them that we are blind to. And just try to rest in that place of equanimity to whatever degree you've generated it. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes fully and we'll talk just a little bit before we take a short break. Any comments on that aspect, that way of working with equanimity? It's not generally taught in the Lam Rim books, but it's like taking the first one, the time thing of impermanence and things changing over time, and using it within the context of other beings, also have different perspectives. Kind of a similar thing, but just a different way of observing that. It has a different impact sometimes because of that. Because, I mean, we've all had that situation. Maybe I keep hearkening back to like high school days or grade school days where somebody would befriend somebody who you didn't like one of your best friends. You'd be like, why do they like that person? Why are they bringing that person over to my house to play when I don't like them? You know, what do they see in them, right? Well, they're seeing something that we're not seeing, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't want to be friends with them, probably. I mean, we do have the example was shared earlier of sometimes we befriend people that are not the best for us and we follow them and have dire consequences. But, you know, we're not seeing things correctly, not encompassing the whole being or the many different facets of that being. I want to share one little quote from a book that the Interfaith Leadership Alliance of Santa Fe that I've been with now for, I think this month, it's actually 12 years. It's pretty amazing that I've managed to continue to be involved, but they're a wonderful group of people and it's evolved a lot. Our group is currently reading a book that's kind of our discussion book for the next couple months. What was the last few months, and I think we have it again December. It's a book that you may have heard of called See No Stranger by Valerie Kaur, I think is her name, Kaur. She's a Sikh woman who is a lawyer and activist, and she's writing mostly about her experience post 9/11 in America, when she, and people that she knew who were darker skinned and wearing turbans were often identified as being Islamic and having the consequences of what happened with 9/11 fall upon them in terms of animosity and hatred and even the killing of someone that she knew who lived in Arizona, worked at a gas station, who was killed shortly after 9/11. Even though he was Sikh, he wasn't Muslim. I'm not justifying any violence in either case, but there was, you know, she's coming from that place of how did she work with that and what was happening. Her whole tagline that she uses throughout this book is that when she meets other people, she thinks, "You are a part of me that I do not yet know." And this is kind of her way of kind of seeing no stranger, seeing nobody. And she really emphasizes this idea of having a curiosity about other people. This is what was coming up for me as I was guiding this meditation and thinking about this topic as well, was that this is kind of to spark some of our curiosity about people. What are we blind to when we're looking at our red relatives, you know, red state relatives or red thinking relatives or whoever the case might be? Some people who we again have a particular bias or attitude towards. What are we missing? Can we be curious about that person? I was thinking after the 2016 election, how wonderful it would have been if there would have been an organization kind of instituting some cross-cultural events. And maybe things have happened to some degree. I know there's those things like the human library where people go and they meet people who are wearing particular labels of, you know, supporters of this or that, and then they sit down and hear from them and talk to them and kind of get an appreciation for them. But just imagine like dinners where everyone came together and you had people of different opposing views who were just there to get to know each other, just to get to understand each other at a different level, to be curious about each other. Maybe they can't get to that place yet of seeing you are a part of me that I do not yet know, but at least have some curiosity, at least want to be a little interested in who are these people that I'm pigeonholing and labeling and putting in a particular category. I think this again is how a lack of equanimity plays out in our society. That we just don't have the ability to kind of hold something that we see as opposing. Oh, this is how I see them in this particular view. Well, they can't possibly be this then. They can't possibly be kind and caring and doing all these other things when this is what they are. And you get to find out about who people really are, what they're passionate about, what they care about. You see that again, there's many things that we're completely blind to. So I don't know. I hope that that is of use. I find that one actually quite useful in my own reflection. I think that I don't know who this person is really. I'm defining them in a very narrow way. And other people see them very differently. I mean, there we talk about Donald Trump. I was never like, I don't know, I never really had any strong emotions about Donald Trump when he was just a real estate business person. I remember seeing some of the Apprentice shows and I thought he was kind of, I don't know, kind of entertaining. He wasn't, somebody who I would want to necessarily go out and have dinner with or something. But why all of a sudden now it's this whole other shift, and it's like, well, which one is the Donald Trump? Is it the stranger that's just kind of this person in New York doing all these businesses? Is it the kind of somewhat clever and cute person on The Apprentice, or is it this person who is involved in all sorts of stuff around January 6th and blah 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 blah? I make it go on with the list. Which is the real Donald Trump? Can we be curious that he's got more facets and features to them than perhaps we're seeing, rather than once more pigeonholing him on the basis of this particular way of behaving and da 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 da? And I'm not saying we condone the behavior. His Holiness is very clear that we have to differentiate the person from the action. What we're getting at here is, what is our attitude towards the person? We can say certain actions are to be, I don't know if condemned is quite the right word, but they are to be certainly frowned upon and something we do our best to avoid in our society so that people aren't harmed on the basis of other people's actions. We can all agree with that, right? But who's the person who's doing those actions? Can we be a little curious about who that person is and see that there are probably more dimensions to them than that one thing that they are doing? Once more, just like we have more dimensions to ourselves than the one time when we've been a really horrible person. Okay. Let's take a little break. I went a little over in what I was talking, but we do just like 10 minutes and then we'll have enough time to at least explore the last technique that I want to share with you and perhaps do a short reflection on that. But take about 10 minutes and we'll resume. So it'll be somewhere right around 10 minutes to 3 here in Santa Fe. All right, let's see if there are any comments or questions, any further things from what we've already talked about before we move on to this final topic for today. No, nothing. There's nothing online. No questions. Oh yeah, Phyllis. Okay, get the microphone over to you. And uh-huh. Uh-huh. Right. I mean, that's a really hard one to work with because again, we're not in any way trying to devalue that person or that relationship, but we want to have kind of the um, I can't help but use the word shock absorbers. When you have a car that doesn't have shock absorbers, if you've ever been in one, and when you hit a bump, it's really painful, right? You want to have some way of absorbing the shock of the way that person can even change in the relationship, much less exit the relationship. And at some point, again, all those beings who are in our front rows of our theaters, we're going to have to say goodbye to. Either they will leave us or we will leave them. So it's not to deny the value of those relationships. It's just to have in place enough thinking and ways of conditioning our minds so that we aren't going to be completely bent out of shape when they exit our lives. Again, remember that whole grief thing that I was talking about, that grief's got two components to it. There's going to be a sadness, without a doubt, when people who are in our lives who are very dear to us exit. I mean, this happens, the older you get, the more and more it happens, it seems, but all of us have dealt with this in our lives. We've all had some loss. And that sting of loss is going to be there. But the extra pain that's sort of there that we have because of the attachment of it's essentially rooted, not, there are many other features to it, but it's essentially rooted in our lack of acceptance of impermanence, in the fact that we haven't yet gotten to a place where we're okay with loss in our lives, where we understand that that's the warp and woof of life. That's not something that we can do away with in terms of what we are experiencing in our lifetimes, is the people coming in and going out of our lives. It's interesting, when I taught a course many years ago for Tibetan Norbaling on conscious relationships, I talked about how we even can do a meditation on equanimity for a single person, in terms of the different ways that they appear in our lives, and different features about them and what have you. But I think that to the degree that we can have an equanimity towards a person who is a friend, means that we're not going to get bent out of shape when whatever happens. Because the whole purpose of that meditation was the fact that there are times when those who we love do appear as a friend, obviously, but there are times when perhaps they even appear like a stranger. Like suddenly they'll say something and you go, what? I'm a friend with that person? I mean, I don't even know that person. They're thinking that, or they believe in that. But then we even have times when those people who are very close to us can actually hurt us very deeply because of that proximity. So we have all three roles with regard to a single person, much less three different people. But conditioning ourselves like that to see that there's, and again, many different facets of it, it's changing. This person isn't a fixed identity. That can begin to undermine some of the attachment that we have for them. But it's still going to be painful when they exit our lives, without a doubt, because that's that other feature that we have to deal with in grief, which is the reality of loss, the reality of no longer having things in our lives that were people that we enjoyed and appreciated and saw good qualities in, and we valued that relationship. So I don't know if I can completely answer your question, but I think to the degree that you have shock absorbers, to the degree that you have things that help you to get back grounded in the reality of things. Because, I mean, I can say when I lost my first partner in 1992, I didn't have Buddhist tools to work with. And it was extremely painful, the grief that I went through. It was somebody who I was with for 13 years of my life, and was very painful, not just because of the loss, but because of the attachment. And I could see what the attachment was doing. It was kept trying to convince myself that that person was somehow going to still be in my life. And I could not make that thought reconcile with the reality of his not being there. So it became this like flying in the face of reality. I think that that's the problem when we have loss in our lives. If our relationship has been primarily one of attachment, well, then it's going to fly in the face of reality, because all we're going to do is keep clinging to the person in our view of who they were, and not understanding the impermanence that was always there, but that we just didn't open up to and kind of incorporate into our lives, so that when that loss actually happens, you'll have a slightly different perspective. I mean, I can see that the losses I've had in my life now, of course, I haven't lost someone as close as Ed was to me in 1992, but I have lost people in my life, and the kind of response to that I've had in my mind and in my own emotions has been very different. I'm not saying I'm any great practitioner and I'm completely free of attachment, but it just does influence you when you kind of hold these thoughts. I remember one teacher, Tibetan Chodak, and I think that was his first name, Tibetan Chodak. Anyway, Chodak, we would always call him. He was traveling with somebody in Europe, and this person would refer to things in the past tense. Like he would say, oh, this was a really great watch that I had, and oh, that was a really great car that I owned. But I mean, he'd still have them, but he would always think of them in the past tense. I mean, it sounds strange as an exercise when most people like kind of go, well, what the heck's that all about? But then if you keep thinking, well, this is something I had, well, then the day you don't have it, you're a lot more used to not having it than if you never thought you were going to be without it. I mean, and having those thoughts doesn't influence it in any way. It just helps you to be more realistic, more in touch with reality, so that when people do exit our lives, as they are bound to do, we can't stop that. Well, what can we stop? We can stop our pain that we have on the basis of that, our valuing of the relationship that we have with them that is not something that's kind of entangled with the idea that they're going to be there forever, with the idea that they're going to satisfy our needs forever. As I said, even that meditation on holding equanimity for one person as they change from somebody likable and lovable to somebody who's completely unknown to us to somebody who we can't just stand. I mean, and that does happen with people that we love. They do change even within that context of being a dear person to us. It helps you to smooth out those rough edges so that when things do happen, when relationships do break up or people do die, then we don't have such a strong emotional reaction to it. We'll have the pain. We won't have all this additional kind of second arrow stuff. Probably some of you have heard me teach on the first and second arrow. This comes from the Salata Sutra, the Arrow Sutra. The first arrow we don't have much control over. That's the stuff we all have to deal with. The impermanence, the changing nature of things, the death, the sickness, what have you. We have a lot of control over the second arrow, which is how much additional pain we throw on top of that on the basis of our mind states that will be influenced by the degree to which we've been attached to that person that we have to, let go of. But I would say that it's more rewarding in the end to have love instead of attachment. Because if we're genuinely with that person, then we always have that love. I mean, that love will be what endures. The attachment cannot, when the person's gone, well, then your object of the attachment's gone. And as I said, when I was dealing with that in my first relationship, it was like this total contrast of I'm wanting that person in my life, that person can't be in my life. I'm wanting that person in my life, they can't be in my life. But I could see that it was a mind of attachment in retrospect because it was about what I needed at that time to have that person there. And that person can no longer be there. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but maybe given a little food for thought about how we can begin to see. And this is perhaps one of the hardest things, but hopefully today and other time we spend examining this topic, we can begin to peel off that part of our mind that is attachment and see that there's a love underneath it that can be for those persons that we consider our front row persons, but it can be for all beings. Because this love is something that isn't contingent upon what role other beings are playing. It's something that we can open our hearts to genuinely wanting others to have happiness, to have that experience, to be free from suffering, what have you. That's actually a perfect segue into what we're talking about in the final topic, which is the ability to see the sameness of these three categories. To be able to see that there's a commonality, something that is there, that is truth, that is not a distortion, that we can rely upon in equalizing our minds towards them. So, was there anything more, Phyllis, you wanted to say, or? Well, yeah, let's say, because that's important if you do want to share something more, to have the opportunity to do that. Yeah.
Especially hard because my husband was a well-known potter
Mm-hmm.
from Canada, and he has a group of people that just love everybody that ever had contact or was a student.
Mm-hmm.
Loved him and remember him and have pots that he made
Right.
and use them. And so a man just came from Canada for 3 days to interview me about John, who wants to write a book about him.
Ah.
And we went through 60 pots that I still have of John's that I want to sell, but I haven't been able to mobilize and do it.
Uh-huh.
Anyways, and talked so he just loved the work. He saw so many things in each pot. And so you have to know, I went through 3 days of in it and out of it, in it and out of it. I mean, and there is just this, so many people in Canada and Minnesota mostly, although he started Santa Fe Clay here with a partner.
Oh, wow.
And then we moved to Abiquiu. He did some work here. I know him there.
Uh-huh. Sure. Hmm. 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 Sure. Sure. But perhaps I'm glad you shared that additional bit, because perhaps by embracing the love that others had for him and that he had for them and for you and your love for him, that there's that love again that is a quality that we can still carry on, the genuine wish for his well-being, his happiness, wherever the consciousness that was John is at this point, still a connection. And so kind of seeing it as, again, something that we can focus, certainly, and many people do, on the loss and that no longer being there, and the attachment of him wanting him to still be here, like I said, that can be so strong. And that will again be frustrated because we can't change the reality that he's no longer here in that physical form. Or we can focus on the love and let that sustain and feed us. Let that feed the circle of love that he created and left in his wake, you know? So I think that's the what I would encourage you to do, is to really focus on that side of it and really feel that in your heart, how wonderful that you had someone in your life who was so well loved and loved so many others and touched you in that way, and that's a gift. And that's the way all the gifts come. They don't come permanently. They come when we get them, and they leave our lives, and we still have that gift that we can carry on. So thank you. Oh, you're welcome. Let's go into this last reasoning, unless there were any other questions, comments. We do have a little bit of time. We may not do another meditation, but anyone online want to share anything or ask a question? Okay. All right. Okay, so we've talked again about, first of all, we went into that preliminary thing of the disadvantages of having these distorted states of mind. And for some people, again, that's strong enough of meditation to begin to remove some of these. But I've been trying to use that as a reminder meditation, just to recall that these are not healthy states of mind to have, these three distortions with regard to these three groups. Then we went through the idea of the impermanence of these relationships, things changing with regard to the relationship those beings have with us. And then secondly, we just concluded this whole idea of these differing perspectives, which again had kind of two sides to it, that our perspective is only based on a very narrow slice generally of that person and is not taking into consideration all the other features. Moreover, we get validation of that by seeing that other people see that person in terms of different perspectives than we do. So who's correct? Who's right? We see that there's a bigger picture there that we have to be cognizant of that can undermine these three distorted states that we have with regard to those individuals or those groups. The last one is the ways that we're all the same. I was mentioning this just a few minutes ago. There are a number of ways that we can talk about beings being the same. The very first one is what we hear in Buddhism all the time, in what we fundamentally want or desire for ourselves. And that's to be happy and to be free from suffering. We often say that, and it's a perfectly valid argument. Is there any difference between any of us in regard to our fundamental desire to have happiness and to not suffer? We even see it in animals in this world, that they are drawn towards what brings them some measure of safety, happiness, what have you, and they are repelled by things that threaten their life and their welfare, right? They don't want to experience suffering, they want happiness. And the Buddha never faulted that impulse, that kind of fundamental way that all beings are. In other words, the Buddha doesn't say that your mission in this life to achieve enlightenment is to let go of your quest for happiness or your desire to not suffer. In fact, that's the main impulse behind everything he taught, was to give beings the means to accomplish the happiness they seek and to be free of all the dissatisfaction and suffering that they experience. It's the whole foundation of why the Four Noble Truths, everything, all of it is built on that. But that can be a very powerful thought if we think about that with regard to anybody. Now, again, how they are going about achieving their happiness or freedom from suffering may be brought into question. And that's once more what we were talking about earlier, dividing the person from the action. the actions of people on the basis of this fundamental desire can be very misguided. I mean, examining what's happening with Israel and Hamas, right? Yes, it's horrible what Hamas did in terms of that particular, strike on October 7th of killing all these people, taking the people hostage and what have you. But, to get this idea that you're going to restore happiness and well-being by inflicting similar harm or even worse harm in some cases when you talk about the numbers on people in Gaza, I mean, it's like you become misguided in how you go about it trying to achieve your welfare. Most beings are misguided about achieving their welfare. Even we're misguided about achieving our welfare at times. But the fundamental desire is the same. And whether you're Donald Trump or Joe Biden or whoever, you've got that fundamental desire to be happy, to not suffer. What you do on the basis of that, we can talk about that in another session, in another workshop about actions and how we should control our actions. But here we're getting at kind of this bottom line thing. And the Buddha stated it, examine it, meditate on it. Is it really true that all beings want to be happy and don't want to suffer? And they might even define what they mean by happiness slightly differently, but they're still motivated by this wish to have what they call happiness, well-being. The Buddha defines it in a very clear way, right? He says there's temporal happiness, ultimate happiness, different ways of discussing that. But this is the first way that sentient beings are the same as you and the same as each other. Secondly, in having the same basic combination of factors. Again, some people might lean heavier on the positive and less on the negative, and some heavier on the negative and less on the positive. But we are a combination of things. Even again, the most horrific being we can look to in this world and this era that we're living in is probably, we're still going to be seeing some sort of positive characteristics. Like Venerable Rabina's, even Adolf loved his little doggy woggy. Well, everybody has some positive aspects to them as well as some negative aspects. We have to be honest with ourselves in terms of our own constitution of both of those. But this is the fundamental situation we also find ourselves in, is that none of us is like a perfect picture of completely positive qualities or completely negative qualities. So that opens the door again for us to have some flexibility around how we're seeing others. We're understanding that we're all in the same boat in terms of this combination of stuff that we're all trying to sort through and figure out how to be in the world and so on. The third one is something I've actually been teaching on Thursday nights here at TNL for the last half year or so, since June. And that's in having the same fundamental nature of our minds, what we often call Buddha nature. And the best way to talk about this is to talk about it in terms of the example that you probably have heard from me, and you'll hear it again today, which is our minds are like the clear glass of water. So if I had a clear glass of water here, imagine I'm holding it, and I went out into the parking lot there and dug under the snow and got a whole bunch of dirt, and I threw the dirt into the water and mixed it all up. The clarity of the water would no longer appear, right? But we have to still contend that it's there in a non-manifest way, because if we run that dirty water through a filtration system, and maybe I have to do repeated filtrations in order to get it back to that pure, clear state, it can return to that. The clarity was there. Just what was defiling it, what was polluting it, was there. We use this term adventitiously. It was just there because we hadn't created the causes to remove it. What we've been studying on Thursday night in this whole long course on Maitreya's text, Uttara Tantra, is that there are kind of two factors. The mind is essentially clear by nature, meaning it doesn't have any of the deepest fault of holding or of having any inherent existence that we're holding to incorrectly. That's the deeper emptiness kind of teaching. But the other aspect of it is this idea that everything that pollutes the mind, everything that is polluting the water can be removed. So everything that is polluting our minds can be removed. It's all adventitious. And of course, the perfect qualities, the qualities of compassion and love and concern and so on, these are actually resonant with the nature of the mind. They're factual. Having compassion for beings, there's nothing distorted about that state of mind. There's nothing diluted about that state of mind. That state of mind is observing sentient beings as they are, suffering beings, beings who are not experiencing complete freedom from suffering, and wanting them to have that. There's nothing distorted about it. Whereas hatred towards those beings is completely distorted because it's once more only focusing on the negative aspects of that person or being and wishing them to suffer because of that, not wanting them to have freedom from suffering at all. It doesn't resonate with truth. It doesn't resonate with reality. So this third topic, again, the first one being they're all the same in what they want, all these beings wanting happiness and freedom from suffering, the same in having the basic constitution of both positive and negative factors. And then third, the same in having the nature of our minds being fundamentally clear and pure, having the same potential to remove all those adventitious stains and become fully enlightened. And then we can also throw a fourth way that all beings are similar that does come up in some of the teachings, which is right now, we're all subject to death. We're all subject to the reality of the round of cyclic existence. And so we're the same in terms of being under the control of these factors, having to experience a lifetime, and then that life at some point coming to an end, going on to the next, whatever comes after, whatever existence. They often call death the great equalizer, right? Because it's the reality we all have to deal with. It's maybe, again, the grosser way that we're subject to impermanence, not the changing of things momentarily, but rather that going out of existence, this life will come to an end. Any being that we're observing, if we hold that view as well, that we understand that this too is a being subject to death. This too is a being that will have an end to their life and have to go through that, process. It can be kind of useful in not having such heavy emotions towards them. We see them through, again, perhaps a lens of compassion rather than whatever other distorted mind comes up. All of this is to help us to arrive at this place of understanding that sentient beings, I like this phrase, I think it may have come from Kathleen MacDonald's book that I have here with me as well, Awakening the Kind Heart. We want to see sentient beings as equal, but not identical. Okay? Because once more, we're not trying to overlook what may be factors and things that do need to be addressed. Again, the person and their actions. They're equal at the level of being persons who are in these categories, having these fundamental desires and so on. We want to see them through that lens, but they're not identical. Because I joked about this back when ISIS was beheading foreigners. There would be Americans that they'd have these horrible videos. I'd never watched a video, but they supposedly released these videos of them using a sword to behead people who they wanted to show the West their animosity, anger, what have you. We're saying, I could have compassion for these people who are in ISIS and really generate this equanimity towards them and see them as equal. But that doesn't mean that I should go get on a plane and go to Syria or Iraq or wherever these people are and try to befriend them in that way. They're equal. I can have the same compassion for them as I do for my pets and my partner and everyone else that is close to me and whatever, all other beings. But it doesn't mean that they're the same as those people, especially as those people that I'm befriending in this life. Wouldn't do much value or much benefit if I were to see them as simply equal and identical to everyone else. Things are different. People do need to be respected who are doing things that are, again, going to be harmful to us or to others. And we need to do something, again, to correct that action as compassionately as possible. But underneath the surface, we see them as equal. So I just wanted to emphasize that phrase while we're talking about all these kind of equal characteristics. We're not making all sentient beings into a kind of a soup of everyone being completely identical. Because they're not. And we're not ever getting rid of, I'll say it for I don't know how many times today, of these three categories. You're not getting rid of them per se. As you develop your bodhichitta and you become more and more kind of well-versed in having kind and compassionate thoughts towards others, you may get to a place like His Holiness is, where he can see all beings as friends. But again, I don't think His Holiness still, even though he might see the people in ISIS as friends, he's still not going to get on a plane and go to, Syria and say, hey, I want you all to stop what you're doing. They probably be just as quick to chop his head off as anyone else's. I hate to say it, but you know, this is the orientation that can be useful. It's interesting, in the traditional teachings, they don't introduce this idea of seeing the similarity of beings, the sameness of beings, until you get to the other technique of developing bodhicitta, the equalizing and exchanging self and others. And that's the main gist of the equalizing self and others, is to see that all beings are fundamentally the same in their desires and are all fundamentally in the same situation, because they are. We don't know who's a Buddha and who's not. And I always have to remind people of that teaching, that Donald Trump could be a Buddha for all we know, or Joe Biden or whoever we take to mind could be a Buddha. But the reality is that most beings are exhibiting what would tend to be non-Buddha behavior, right? So we take that on face value and we try to react or respond as usefully as we can to that. So we try to hold beings all in this equal regard through these sorts of thoughts, as well as the other meditations that we've done. So again, let's just review those three main things. After talking about the disadvantages of these three distorted attitudes, we can talk about reflecting on the impermanence, the transitory nature of all these, the differing perspectives that we would have if we knew more about the being, or that others have because they see them differently. And then the third, that we can think about the sameness of beings. And this is a very valuable way to kind of equalize oneself and others, to see that there's no real difference even between ourselves and others, much less all these other beings that we're observing. We're all fundamentally the same. We use that phrase a lot during the pandemic, right? We're all in the same boat. I mean, but not identical, right? Because some people lost their lives to the virus and had to deal with, horrible loss of other people in their lives, and had to deal with not getting access to medical care and blah, 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 blah. I mean, we can admit that there's not an identical nature to everybody, but we are all in the same boat. And the Buddha would say that in regard to samsara, cyclic existence. This is what we are all contending with, until we've attained a state of liberation from that and enlightenment. So it is important that when we are generating this, that we don't arrive at that place of complacency or indifference. That's not the goal. It's to open our hearts more and more to have some empathetic and sympathetic connection with other beings. And on the basis of that, as I said earlier, to generate love and compassion. Those are the two fundamental minds that lead us to having bodhicitta, which are the response to this fundamental desire that all beings have. If all beings want to be happy, don't want to suffer, well, we're going to generate the great love that wishes them to be happy and enacts that happiness for them through becoming a Buddha, as well as the great compassion that doesn't want them to suffer and moreover is committed to protecting them from suffering by becoming a Buddha. So again, this is how we kind of see this moving into the other directions of the bodhicitta motivation that we need to cultivate on the basis of equanimity. So rather than lead another meditation, because again, we are running out of time, I thought I would just talk a little bit about those and share one quote that, again, well, maybe I'll share that at the end. Let me see what questions or comments people might have from the day. Has everyone found something today to practice? Oh, Space would like to add a comment or question. Well, there'll be a can of worms that we can see with equanimity.
I have a hard time finding any love and support for the people finding in Gaza.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
And
again,
the whole
all right.
watching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I understand. I understand this point of view. I guess again, if we take out kind of, because there is an emotional component to that, it's really hard to see sentient beings, human beings, inflicting such harm on other human beings. But I keep going back to that idea of the person in the action. Why are people engaging in this action? This action we can condemn without a doubt. We can condemn any killing of any being. And I'm really bothered by the whole thing that happens. I mean, it happened when the Russian invasion of Ukraine happened, where people started posting on Facebook, like, I'm with Ukraine. Even some people that I had as friends, I'm with Russia. Well, and we're doing that now with, I stand with Israel, I stand with Palestine, or whatever. I mean, I stand with humanity. I stand with the greater good of all beings eventually being able to get to a place where we're no longer inflicting harm on each other. So let's stand there and not stand on the one side or the other. So with that in mind, we can condemn the actions that happened on October 7th of Hamas coming into Israel. We can condemn the actions that are happening of genocide or ethnic cleansing or whatever label we want to put on it that's happening in Gaza right now. We can condemn these actions. We can say these actions need to be stopped. But we can still have compassion for the people who are engaging in them, because I hate to say it, but we've been those torturers to other people before in another lifetime. In this lifetime, we think we're much better than that. We would never do that. We would never be convinced of that. But the people who are inflicting this harm have been conditioned to think that way, to think that what their actions are of no consequence, that they can do that with no guilty mind or whatever. Maybe they do have guilt, but they're not certainly expressing it. The idea is that we can have compassion for others because they are like us. They have the ability to be different. They just don't have the causes and conditions right now to change them. But some people do change. I mean, I would hope that of these forces on either side, that there will be some people who reach a point where they go, this isn't working for me. This harm and suffering and killing I'm inflicting on the other side is not working for me. I was so hopeful, of course, many things we've seen in the past of people in Palestine and Israel trying to have more dialogue and working together. And even here in Santa Fe, we have this wonderful project, Future Women. I don't know what it's called. You've heard of this, right? Where they bring young women from Palestine and Israel together, and they put them in a workshop together. Pardon? Yes, a camp all summer. And it's a wonderful effort, but its change takes a long time, to bring people to a place where they can start seeing the other side as human beings like themselves, have the respect for their life in the same way that they want to be respected. So I agree with you. It's horrible to see these things, but I would hope that through our practice, we can eventually get to a place where we can have compassion for the victims and the perpetrators of any particular action, because we see that they're the same, they're just in different conditions. I mean, I have no doubt in my mind that if beings, if the beings of Israel and Palestine are being reborn as humans, that many of them are being reborn on the opposite side of the fence. That after having been the perpetrator of harm towards Palestine, they are born as a Palestinian, inflicting harm on the Israelis. And it's a circle that is never going to end until one side says, enough is enough. We've got to stop harming ourselves and harming others. So I hear your sentiment, and it's wonderful that you have a heart that is moved in the way that it is. And I don't in any way want to diminish that. I think the important thing is to always once more say, I can condemn these particular actions, but I still have to maintain my compassion for the people, because underneath the surface, there is something worthwhile. It's just not there right now in a manifest way because of the conditioning of this life and the karma that led beings to be born in Israel, in Palestine, whatever. It's very hard for it to break and to change, to get away from it, but it's not impossible. I'll share with you a story that I've shared before with some of you, I'm sure, of Vinnie Ferraro, which again, it's nothing to do with Israel and Palestine, but it shows that we all have that potential. Vinny right now is a meditation instructor, and he started his life though in New Haven, Connecticut, on kind of the wrong side of the tracks or whatever. And his father was a drug dealer, and he became a drug dealer at a very young age. And he got pretty much in with the wrong people, started hanging out with gangs and inflicting harm on people. And they would like to go out on weekend evenings or whatever with their baseball bats, and they'd beat up homeless people with their baseball bats. The story goes that Vinny came upon this one homeless man with he and his gang. And Vinny had his bat raised to beat this homeless man. And the homeless man locked eyes with him and said, "Please don't do this to me." And Vinny said, "What makes you think I'm not going to do this to you?" And this homeless man said, "Because you have the most compassionate eyes I've ever seen." And it was like, he didn't say he dropped the bat, but it was like at that point, something shifted, something changed in his heart. He saw something very different. He got a different perspective on himself, on the person he was going to inflict harm on, and it ceased. That hostility ceased. And he's, again, now a meditation instructor. He does have these amazing eyes. If you look up his name on the internet, it's quite impressive. He's really, touching eyes. But this is the potential we all have. And when I teach on this, I often talk about Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche's term that he used. He calls this the soft spot. Pema Chodron talks about this in her teachings because she was a student of his. We all have the soft spot, which is that place of deep connection where we can be totally compassionate, caring, loving, kind. It's our Buddha nature in a sense. But many of us armor it to a great degree. The people who do horrible, cruel acts to other beings have armored it a lot. But you can never fully armor it. As Leonard Cohen says, there's always the crack where the light gets in, right? There's always a little crack there and something can shift. And so for Vinny, it was this homeless person who locked eyes with him and said these words to him. And the light made it in and exploded all of this armor. Became a totally different person. Well, this is something we can also wish for those people who are doing this kind of harm right now. May they find their soft spot. May they have that awakening, that epiphany, and be able to actually function from a very different place, right? I mean, it's possible. I really believe it's possible. I think it's difficult given the situation and the circumstances and all the conditioning that has happened in Israel and Palestine over the, decades, but it's possible. Okay, I don't know. Does that help? Ferraro, just like Geraldine Ferraro. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I think we should conclude. We're at 3:30. I really do hope that this has been of some benefit. I want to share one little closing quote before we do our dedication from His Holiness. And he says, "Even though you may not have the ability to benefit other people right now, you must prepare your mind to do so." And that's kind of a guiding principle for all of these teachings, especially in the kind of the bodhisattva path on compassion, equanimity, love. Even though we don't have that ability right now, we must prepare our minds to do so. That's what we're doing here. That's what we're doing on this Mahayana path, is preparing our minds to be able to have that equanimous state, to have the ability to have love and compassion for all beings. And don't beat yourself up if you don't have it yet. That's okay. At least you want it. At least you want to do the work. That's the most important thing, is to continually feed that energy, and it'll all happen. I have no doubt. So let's dedicate what we've done today. We'll do this with the two prayers. I just know the Tibetan probably much more than I do the English. But the first prayer is, through the force of what we've done here today, may we become a Guru Buddha and then lead all sentient beings to that same state. The second prayer is the wish that our mind of bodhicitta, whatever we've developed, as well as the mind of equanimity that we're working on in this workshop, all of these states of mind that are positive, that are beneficial, may they continue to develop and grow whatever we have cultivated. May it never decline in the least. And just hold that strong intention as we chant these two verses in Tibetan. Gewadi nyur dudak lama sangye drup gyurne dohachi kyang mahalupa dehi sahala goparsho Jang Tub Sem Chogrin Poche Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyurchi Ke Wanyam Pa Me Payam Gong Ne Gong Du Pel War Sho. And let's dedicate for the good health and long life of especially His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who's the exemplar, the leader of this bodhisattva mind and mentality and behavior in our world, kind of shows us exactly how to practice on the path and continues to abide in this world to help us and others. May he and all other of our Mahayana gurus have good health, long lives, and all their holy wishes fulfilled. And then we also dedicate for the very swift return of our precious Guru, spiritual director of the FPMT, Kyabji Zopa Rinpoche, that we may be reunited with him in a physical form again very, very soon, so he can guide us and all beings in this world on our path. And lastly, we dedicate for all those beings that we're holding in our hearts. Again, they might be more front row people, but that's what we have to work with mostly. Mainly, our hearts are quite open to those front row people. So think about anyone in that category who's experiencing difficulties, sufferings, but also try to extend your heart to those people that have kind of gotten through to your soft spot, those beings in other parts of the world where they're experiencing great strife, difficulty, suffering. Try to hold whoever it is that you can open your heart to in your thoughts right now and send this positive energy you've created today out to them. So it becomes the cause to alleviate their suffering immediately. And moreover, becomes the cause to bring them everything that will guide them perfectly to complete Buddhahood. And may all the beings in our theater, every single being, also have these same results through what we've done here today. Thank you all. I really appreciate you all being here and giving me the opportunity to do my blah, blah, blah on equanimity. And I do hope that you found at least one thing of value to practice. I mean, there's a lot here that we talked about, but at least to be able to go forth from here with one idea that you would like to incorporate into your meditation practice or your way of being. And I'll see you all again soon, hopefully. So thank you all.